Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of the Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. I'm Jodi, Carlton, your host, and I'm a neurodiverse relationship expert. But like so many of you, I've been on my own journey of discovering and understanding neurodiversity, both in my personal life with my family members and even myself, and professionally as a therapist and now relationship coach to people around the world. I'm often asked, can neurodiverse partner relationships actually work? And the answer is absolutely they can. Just like any relationship, there are core variables that influence whether or not you'll thrive as a couple. Neurodiverse relationships are no different, but they have the added layer of being neurodiverse, where one or both partners is neurodivergent. So this season, I've got a lineup of couples and partners who are in neurodiverse relationships that are working. They get real personal with me about the challenges they have faced and how they've overcome those challenges in their relationships. Let's get started. Stephanie and Dan, thank you so much for being on the podcast again. I think this is what our third, fourth, I don't even remember how many times we've done a podcast together. I've lost track. It's always a joy though. So today, this series that I'm doing right now is about, can neurodiverse relationships work? That's a question that I get a lot. And then it's something I see a lot in comments on my YouTube channel or other social media where people are saying, get out, they never work, you need to run, leave. And, that raises triggers me because I'm like, wait, hold on. I do know that they can work and they do, and I see them working, although it is definitely, neurodiversity is another layer that of everything else we bring to a relationship that can cause difficulty. So I definitely wanted to have the two of you on, and thank you for being here because you are a couple that is making it work. And I know that that has come with plenty of challenges of its own. So I'd love for the two of you to talk about what some of those challenges have been, and then what the elements of success have been. And I know you also have a new book. So it's Uniquely Us, Gracefully Navigating the Maze of Neurodiverse Marriage. So welcome. And I think a lot of the listeners are going to know who the two of you are, but in case we've got some new folks, can you just introduce yourselves and tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
So we're Stephanie and Dan, and maybe you've heard us on Neurodiverse Christian Couples podcast because, as Jodi was saying, we're in the neurodiverse section, but then we go one more little niche into that, which is where faith or Christianity might intersect with their neurodiverse relationship. I was a licensed professional counselor by trade. When I first got out of school, I am now more of a life coach. And Dan is I'm just going to say computer guy by trade, but he also is a master life coach. And sometimes we work with a couple like separate and together, and we do classes together, like skill building type classes. And so I turned my whole kind of coaching practice into neurodiversity about 5-6 years ago. And so that's kind of definitely all we specialize in right now.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Dan, anything you want to add to what Stephanie said?
No, that's a good elevator pitch.
She did a great job.
Yes. Too bad I can't remember that.
Yeah, right. Can't pull that one out of your back pocket, huh? Okay. And I think you and I are on a similar path in terms of transitioning from licensure to coaching. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that coaching is the way to go. I know what my perspective is on that. And I think this kind of contributes to this conversation in terms of what helps a neurodiverse relationship work. What is your, what do you believe about why coaching is more beneficial than the therapy models that you and I were taught?
Do you want me to go first while you think and process and answer?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to give Dan some processing download time. So I think, first of all, with traditional marriage therapy, you keep the couple together all the time. And the whole kind of sole focus is the relationship. And it's a lot of talk-based therapy. And some models even like talk about your feelings and all of that. And so I find when you have the couple together, especially when they come in and they're like in crisis mode, they're going to separate, they're going to divorce. I can't take this anymore. He or she won't do this, that, or the other. Like sitting around and just talking about going through the weeds of all the things and all the problems is not really going to be helpful. Plus, in a neurodiverse situation, sometimes if the wife is sharing, then the husband gets dysregulated, or if the husband is sharing his perspective and the wife is in a trauma response, then she gets dysregulated. So the traditional model of kind of keep everybody together and focus on feelings and how are you feeling, I really think coaching, while we do need to talk about the past and how we got here, we need to talk about reality-based solutions. We need to talk about skill building, because I think traditional marriage therapy also assumes both people coming and sitting on the couch, so to speak, are the same neurotype, have the same skill set, And so I feel like even before you can get to marriage work, you've got to build skills. You've got to build communication skills. You've got to figure out what triggers people. You've got to build regulation and communication skills before you even start diving in
Yeah.
to the
Even
marriage.
even figure out what the skill set is to start with, and
Right.
then
Like,
go
where are you
from
already
there.
challenged and where's your
Mhm.
strengths? And then move forward.
Yeah, I just second everything you said. I couldn't have said any of that better. Dan, what are your thoughts about coaching versus, I mean, you're not you don't come from a therapy training background, but just from being a coach and having been, been on the receiving end of some of that too along the way. What are your thoughts?
It fits better, but I don't know what the other side of that was since I was never a counselor. But the analogy that is, I don't know, maybe pertinent here is if you're on a ball team of any kind, what you're after is for the coach to help you get better at that particular position, regardless of what it is. What is it that you're good at? What is it that isn't working? So you build your own particular skill. Let's just pick baseball because that's the one I like the best. Then your second base, you need to be good at doing second base things, just that as a specific activity, as a specific skill. And then when you're good at that, or as you're getting good at that, you learn how to act as a team. So until I can catch the ball, it doesn't do me any good to practice a double play,
Mhm.
right? And that's kind of the same idea here. If I'm not good at listening, or if there is a self-regulation skill that would be necessary, it doesn't do me a lot of good to go talk to my wife when the only thing I'm going to do is get deregulated. And that's the idea there is I need to be better at being me, while maybe a lagging indicator is being better at being us.
I love that analogy. And as a matter of fact, I've used something very similar myself. And I don't know, maybe you and I talked about it once upon a time and I stocked it away in my brain. I don't know. I go on to say, in addition to what you just said, that when you look at therapy and coaching, the coach is exactly what you just said. The coach focuses on the skills. When you've got a team, like a baseball team, and with a couple, you have a team. Sometimes you pull each individual player aside to say, okay, let's work on your skill set. Whereas a therapist, the therapist may be someone to help the team members process how they feel about all of it and how they feel about each other as team players and process their emotions about it. And it's not that therapists don't work on skills too, but like you said, Stephanie, a lot of times with marriage couples, it's just always together. And sometimes you need to be able to talk about the other person. So love that analogy. So that was a little bit of a side note, but I think it leads us right into, what are some of the challenges? What are the challenges that neurodiverse couples and partners of any neurotype? And so what are some of the extra challenges that the two of you have seen in your own relationship and also in the work that you do as coaches?
I keep the thing of me go first and then you second. Or do you have one?
I actually want to make a clarification at
Okay.
this point.
All right.
Oh,
So
yes.
we've been using the word neurodiversity at this point, but I think we ought to be specific going forward, because neurodiversity is broad. And in this particular conversation, I think it's too broad.
Okay.
Dyslexia, for instance, it doesn't necessarily have a relational challenge to it. It's, right?
That's
It's more of a reading thing. So you can be neurodiverse and dyslexic or left-handed or whatever the others are, and maybe not face these set of challenges. So in where we are, neurodiversity in a relational context likely means autism of some
Or
kind.
ADHD.
Right. Maybe we should narrow it down so folks don't think that this is completely the full spectrum of everything going on. This is really a relational aspect that we're working through. Others might have a completely different problem, right? If I can't read and write very well because of my dyslexia, I've got a different set of challenges, but that is not what we have a whole lot of familiarity with.
Right. Okay. So for you, this is autism. And I agree that the neurodiverse umbrella is getting bigger and broader. And I know Stephanie, on our professional panel, we talked about that some. And I totally agree with you, Dan, that we need to be really specific about what we're talking about. Would you say, I actually have a question for you, Dan, and also for you, Stephanie. So you're saying, okay, dyslexia in and of itself, assuming that it's the only neurodivergence there. As coaches, well, you probably don't see much of this because people wouldn't come to you necessarily. But I know for me, usually when I see some kind of neurodivergence like dyslexia, whether it's that or what's been identified is sensory processing, the more we unpackage, the more we start to see more neurodivergence there in an individual whether it's ADHD or other types of neurodivergences, if you will. Do you see that type of thing in yourselves, in your?
Yeah. So because I think for me, kind of the same thing, like when you start getting someone with all of these diagnoses, dyslexia, OCD, ADHD, sensory processing, generalized anxiety. And it's like, wait a minute, what if we combined all of those? It tends to come together, for, autism and or ADHD, depending on if the person has trauma or whatever. And then you got to put trauma in the mix. So I think we see a lot of kind of crossover. So Dr. Tony Atwood would say, rarely do you see autism pure in and of itself. There is usually a co-occurring issue. So that autism plus dyslexia or autism plus generalized anxiety, that autism plus ADHD, which is now ADHD, those are going to present very differently in the person and create a different set of challenges for the couple. And that's assuming that, there's just one neurotypical, but we're finding more and more the one who thought they were neurotypical might be ADHD. So while they're not autistic, they've got some of their own, neurodivergency going on as well. So we're seeing a lot of that too. So Dan just read a book on dyslexia and identifying a lot of processes there for himself. And in the book, it said, oh, you can't be dyslexic and autistic. And we've talked to other clinicians and I've talked to them like, oh yeah, we see that all the time. So now we see a crossover a lot. So
It's interesting, isn't it, how historically, or that there are practitioners still, but historically, a lot of these things have been thought of as distinct and separate. I know that for the longest time, I even just kind of rolled ADHD under, well, not ADHD in and of itself, but if someone was autistic, I rolled the traits that go with ADHD into the autism umbrella. But I'm also seeing now that not everybody who's autistic has those same ADHD traits. So it's just you have to kind of start looking at, for each person, like the saying goes, you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But thank you for that clarification, Dan. So in this conversation, we know that you're autistic, Dan, and Stephanie. What would you say? Are you ADHD or
I'm currently in perimenopause and have a temporary ADHD brain.
Oh man, I can relate to that.
A year or so ago, it was a neurotypical brain.
Yeah,
and now I question that because of perimenopause.
That's it. It's funny you should say that because I can really relate to that. And then I start looking back at my history and I'm like, no, I didn't really see ADHD. But then the more I look back, I realized I was a very high masking ADHD and didn't realize it. So, which is also, I think, a pattern that so many people start to realize as we get older and learn more about this. So let's talk about the two of you, though. So what kind of challenges have been, like if you had to pick your top three, what would those be? Or that may be too hard to pick.
Okay. Well, I'll start with one and then kind of offer a solution.
Okay.
I'll let you do it. So I think back in the early days, so part of our story is we have two neurodivergent children. So our oldest daughter was diagnosed first, 2005, 2006, as a girl, very difficult, no resources. The school did not want to play nice and play along. And she also has like an OCD secondary with her, what was then Asperger's. Now she was reevaluated autism level 1. Our second daughter was originally diagnosed PDD and OS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, for those of you who don't know that. And it used to be, could this be ADHD? Could it be autism? We don't know. She was not hitting her developmental milestone. In fact, it began to regress. And so then she did end up with an ADHD inattentive type diagnosis. So both of these girls had like multiple therapies, multiple treatment protocols. Schools were not really playing along. We didn't know we were a neurodiverse couple too. I just thought our marriage was difficult because we had challenges with our children, challenges with the church, challenges with the school. It was just, everything was really hard. Marriage and life was on hard mode. And so a challenge back in the early days, and maybe this was part of our faith-based things, was I was really carrying the mental load, everything. And because we grew up in really conservative circles, we were trying to stick to the very conservative gender roles. Women do this and men do this. And then I was also working full time. And in our premarital counseling, the pastor had said, well, you're allowed to work, Stephanie, but your like home duties can't suffer from that. So like if you take on work, don't expect Dan to help, kind of a mentality. So I think for me, like one of the big things was the trying to do these gender roles that didn't match our neurotypes and didn't match what we were good at or what we even wanted to do. So we were just plugging through. I was carrying the mental load. I was getting resentful. I was burning out as the neurotypical prefrontal lobe with the family and trying to keep it all together, plus licensed professional counselor at the time, listen to everybody else's junk. And I was heavily into domestic violence stuff back then. So like really heavy things. And so I about had a nervous breakdown one day. And I just like, I cannot do all the things that I'm doing. And so we decided then as a couple to what is going to work best. We really changed our thinking. We are a system and our family is a system. And Dan is a computer guy that understands systems theory from the computer. I was a family systems trained therapist. It's like, what are we going to do that's best for our system? And, we didn't have autism for him yet, but like he would always say, one thing, Stephanie, give me one thing. Don't ask me to do a bunch of things. And I always thought he was just being like, I don't know, but really he needs one thing. He needs one thing, to stay, for his executive function. So we put all the things out on the table, and it turns out like he not only enjoyed cooking, but cooking became like a de-stressor from him. And so like he took on cooking, which is really huge for every woman listening to this, right? And meal planning.
Yes.
And when he took that off my plate, I could manage all of the other, my executive function works fine to do a bunch of detail. I can stop and start and do this and make that call. And I've got 5 minutes here. I can do that and then get back on task. That's not a problem for me. That's a problem for him to ask him to do something in the workday, take a break, do the thing, and then get back on work task. That's not going to work. So that cooking, him coming home and being able to transition into that. And then on the weekend has the time to go get the supplies and ingredients or whatever. That worked for us. And it was like a game changer for mental load and stress reduction and for us.
Yes.
That's mine. That was a challenge and a solution. What's your challenge that you think one of our big challenges?
I guess it's probably similar to the conversation we had last night. I don't know what's important all the time to you, or how to know what feeling is deepest. So if you're thinking about, I don't know how else to explain this.
Try. So like if there's a thing that's happened and I'm like really upset about it, let's not talk about the whole thing about Delta. But I've had a long-standing love-hate relationship with Delta since 2004 when they screwed up a major flight. So something happens at Delta, and I'm like, I hate Delta. I can't believe they did the blah, 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 blah. I'm just so frustrated. Like, well, let's evaluate this. Is it really Delta's fault? Could it be TSA? Could it be the baggage handler? I'm like,
I don't sound like that.
just be irrational with me for a little bit. Like, you don't have to agree with my point of view at the moment, but I am upset. Please stop trying to make me not upset by explaining why it might not be Delta's fault. Like, just be with me. He does not know how to be irrational with me.
Oh, I love that statement. Hold on. We have to stop and honor that statement. I think what you just said is huge. And I think the autistic folks listening are going to be like, what did she just say? Because you said he doesn't know how to be irrational. And what you were just describing, talk to me more about that, because what you were just describing is like that emotional vent, that emotional just discharge of energy that is in the moment irrational. And can you just hold on a second, Dan? Because I want Stephanie to share with the listeners more what she meant by that. Because what you just described, the interaction between the two of you, he sees that this is irrational. And so he's going to try to help you recognize that. But in that moment, talk to me about your perspective on that and why it's important for you to be able to have those irrational rants.
So Dan, like most people on the spectrum, I go looking for the problem to solve and the most efficient way to solve the problem. And emotions are not always rational. Emotionals are not always accurate. But in the moment, to the person, that is their experience, what they're feeling. I'm feeling frustrated at Delta. And so a struggle Dan has had with me, and a lot of our couples do, is like, just be with me in the moment. Just sit there with me and let me be frustrated and say, man, I can see you're really frustrated right now. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm sorry you're frustrated. Like, just something that simple. Or I don't know how to be with you right now because I don't necessarily agree. I'm not mad at Delta 2, but you are. So what do you need? Like, something like that could be so.
I'm just reflecting. I see you're upset. So I want to just kind of add to that irrational, but you said emotions are not necessarily accurate, which is so true. Emotions are data. Emotions are data, just like logical, the way our thoughts are data too. And so the emotion oftentimes is the alarm system, is how I look at it. It's what informs us. It informs us of what we need to attend to. But I think a lot of people do make the mistake that their emotions are actual facts. Their emotions are what they feel is the truth. And it is the reality of the experience in the moment, but you feeling like Delta is horrible and awful and bad and never gets anything right is irrational. But really what it is, it's just a kind of an alarm system for you that's something big, to be aware, to be cognizant of these big organizations, airlines, whatever, can make mistakes. Whereas Dan, you're coming in saying, okay, let's talk about this. And let me hear from your perspective, because you said I didn't sound like that. So tell me about your perspective.
It was her tone of voice. So that whole interaction. So number one, I forgot all about how far back her and Delta go.
2004.
This was another single instance moment for me. The other thing that was going on was the way she phrased her emotions was I was joining her in a truth that I disagreed with. I wasn't joining her in a, this is how I feel. Her phrasing, which I took literally, I used the words that she actually said, because that's what I do. And because of that, because of those two things, I didn't connect the dots of Delta going back however far. And I did not read the extra words that she didn't say when she declared that you've joined my club. Oh, that Delta sucks.
So we were on the plane. We get all ready to go. We're actually going to leave out on time. And there was not a security check. So we have to deplane, and they have to wait for a team to come do the security, whatever. And then we're going to have to replane, all of that stuff. So it's going to push, they're saying maybe an hour behind. So we're taking our stuff, and he's like, oh, that sucks, or I can't believe this. And by the time we get to the end of the walkway, he's like, you know what? I think security is a TSA thing. So it's like I rescind my statement. I was like, oh, I had you in my club for like 3 minutes. You gave up your membership by the time we sat down. And then we get to the baggage claim, and one piece of our luggage is decimated. We can't use it anymore. There's a hole in the side, the wheel.
Oh, no.
I'm like, do we hate Delta now? And he's like, this is probably the baggage people. And I don't know if they work for the airport or Delta. So like that accuracy of like where the quote blame has to be. I'm like, you can't even join the I hate Delta club over our bag is now demolished and we can never use it. And he's like, no.
So what you guys just described, I think is such a common issue when it's not always the women, it's not always the wife, but when someone is needing to have, I don't know, just like a perspective of some kind that's not completely literally logical. I think that so many couples end up disconnecting or misunderstanding each other when one partner's needing to have that vent or have that perspective, or the, Delta Haters Club, just because I had this experience and all the confirmation bias sense is like, yes, I still hate that, whether it's a political opinion or whatever. And I think that one of the major disconnects for neurodiverse couples is that autistic partner is coming in with the literal aspects of it, the logic, and the neurotypical partner is just needing to feel the emotion. And I think a lot of my autistic folks that I know that are my family members and clients don't understand that temporary bandwagon that neurotypicals will jump on it's, maybe there's been a fight with a partner and they go talk to a friend and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I hate that. And that's awful. Doesn't mean that we now hate this person. It's just, or that you'll never fly Delta again. It's just that it's that temporary joining up of the emotion about it. Stephanie, do you want to speak to that, or Dan, either one, want to reflect on, or am I making sense?
I think that's like the frustration, because it's not like I hate Delta t-shirts and picket and boycott, Delta. I mean, we live in Atlanta. So it's a hub. You're going to fly Delta. I did try for about 5 years not to fly Delta. It made it really hard because stopping all over the place. I was like, I just want a one-way stop. And I'd be like, nope, I just like Delta. So I'm going to fly. I'm going to inconvenience myself. But I think it's just like, whatever it is, we picked this one because it just happened yesterday. And we went to bed still discussing it. And Dan was still like, I still don't understand. How do I join the club if I don't really agree? And so I think a positive, though, is we can have these discussions and kind of laugh about them. Like, this isn't like I guess this is like a death of a family member or a miscarriage or something like that. If you can't join me, and that's much more serious and much more wounding. But these kinds of things that happen, like bandwagon, where I jump on a bandwagon of just something right now I'm really frustrated about. He doesn't know how to temporarily do the bandwagon thing. But we can sit and discuss it. And sometimes we have to, and I tell my clients too, sometimes you're going to have to put that in the unsolved mystery file sometimes. You're not going to get to a resolution every single time. And if you as a neurotypical I'm going to make sure he understands, and I'm going to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. If I talk about it enough, he's going to get it, or
Mhm.
the neurodivergent spouse is going to get it. So there is a space. It's like, okay, we don't get it. We tried to resolve it, and we can keep staying aggravated with each other, or we can kind of put it in that unsolved mystery file and see what happens next time. That's
Yeah.
type of emotional support because he is better. Since we threw him under the bus on the Delta Club, like much better on like when there's been a loss or we've been at the hospital or something has happened, and being able to step in and be an emotional support there, like that is way improved on the really important things. But some of the bandwagon stuff, we just can't.
So what speak to that then, because those are some important issues. Like you said, if somebody's in the hospital, there's a death of a family member, you said that's improved. Can you talk me through, maybe Dan, even from your perspective? Because in the beginning you said, I don't know what's important. I don't know, what's emotionally important to her sometimes. So in what way, from your perspective, has that improved? What strategies do you use to recognize, oh, this is something important that I need to handle differently?
Well, the easiest way to explain that is your presence in a hospital. And that truthfully, that hasn't always been true. But that is now, well, okay, where am I? I'm in a hospital. Who are we here to see? Right? Is it the difference between a veterinary hospital and a people hospital?
Mhm.
How close am I or her to whomever it is we're going to see? That's probably the biggest difference. So if you contrast that with the airport, no part of that, no geographical connection showed up there. You didn't
Mm.
get to this is important because, oh, well, we're in an airport. It didn't happen. You're in a place that is usually mm, ripe with emotion of some kind. Either you're excited because, maybe you're at a hospital because this is celebrating the birth of a child, or maybe you're at the hospital because you're doing the opposite.
Mhm.
You're lamenting the loss of
Mhm.
someone or the pending loss of someone. And those have learned to be situations that are extremes, right? Extremes are easier to find than just the everyday walkabout. That's still challenging, is to see what's going on in the everyday. The extreme hospitals, what are the good examples?
Maybe a phone call
Yeah.
that there's distressing news or something's going to alter.
Significant alteration of facial, like, so one of the things that's also true is being able to recognize significant tone of voice or demeanor changes. And I mean significant, not right, because I still can't recognize the same person on a television show 10 minutes later. I'm
Wow.
still wondering, who that person is. But the tone of voice, we go from this casual, jovial conversation, the phone rings, and now the conversation tone that changes significantly. Usually, if you get a phone call in an off hour, usually that means it's not good because other things can wait. Those things usually don't. So it's exception based, and it's usually extreme exception based. Now you switch to that's probably whatever, right? Based on the situation. And it puts you in a mode of thinking of, well, maybe I should antenna up or whatever, changes your approach to whatever's going on.
Which the significance of that, and we won't go into the detail because it's kind of a triggering story, but there was a time in the hospital where Dan wasn't there and he left and he didn't tell me he was leaving. And we didn't know about our neurodivergence then. And as we processed it many years later, he did not understand or comprehend that his presence was important to me.
Mm.
His rationale was, well, the hospital was distressing me. There was nothing I could do about it. If you needed medical help, you are in a hospital surrounded by nurses and doctors. So why is me sitting in that chair necessary?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was like devastating to me.
Mhm.
And so as we worked through that and kind of went, there are some key moments. We didn't go through like every single thing once we found out we were a neurodiverse couple, like through the lens, but that was a really big one. And it took several times to kind of get through it without one or both of us getting triggered or argumentative. But that was super helpful for me as I understood more about autism, and the hospital is a very sensory place and the
Mhm.
rationale at the time. And so for me, it was very healing when recently, a couple of years ago, my father was passing. It was kind of one of those, you don't know when it is, but it's going to happen sometime this week or sometime this weekend. And I was not wanting to like disturb Dan's schedule. So I was like, I'll call you if I need you. But like he made the decision, like, no, I'm going to drive up to Charlotte. This is important. Stephanie needs me right now. And I didn't even ask for it. I think I was possibly afraid I would ask and it'd be turned down, but he came up and then was there at the hospital and like anything I needed or the girls needed, because that's their granddad. And I was trying to support my mom. And also he was kind of there to support me because I was trying to support everyone else. And that was like a huge shift of like, you don't even have to know what to say, but just your presence and
Mhm.
asking, what can I do? Or how can I help? Or a hug every once in a while. Like, this
Mhm.
is hard. That was tremendous.
Just
It
even
was,
the availability, just being there to be someone to do the things if you needed that. And so I think, gosh, this was such a great example because this is one that I hear a lot. The hospital, the illness, the sickness, something. I think so many people are going to relate to what you just described, that exact scenario where somebody's in the hospital and an autistic partner says, well, I can't do anything for you here. You're in the best of care. So, and I know I've had at least a couple of specific clients come to mind where that autistic partner just went back to work and they're doing everything they can to keep, working and paying the bills. But I want you to, I want to just emphasize something I heard you say you said we won't get into the details because it's still somewhat triggering, but you have talked through it now to help understand what was going on for each of you. That's, hospitals are, very sensory, very sensory. And so that's something that's invisible that we can't see about each other. We can't see about our partners. We can't know how difficult it is to be in that setting for somebody. We can't know they're even, struggling with it. So the two of you have gained some clarity by going back and understanding it from a neurodiverse lens. Stephanie, you just said it helped you to understand it better. A lot of neurotypical partners are going to hear that you are recognizing that you need to accommodate Dan, but I know that's not what you're saying. Because a lot of neurotypical partners take that type of information and say, okay, we've learned about it, but now that means I have to accommodate him because he's overwhelmed in the hospital. But then you went on to say that Dan actually also updated his awareness of what it means to, when it's important to be available. So I guess there are two things that I'm asking. One is in what way is it important? Have you noticed that it's important to not go back into those stories in too much detail over and over again? Because I know a lot of my couples end up going back and recycling, and that's, you set a boundary, even saying we're not going to get in the details. So that's my first question. Let's just start with that one. How, talk to me about how you set boundaries with yourselves about going back through and, talking through or rehashing or bringing up old stuff that was painful when it happened, even when you've got a new lens. Does that make sense?
yeah. So, because definitely, and my clients would say the same thing too, like just going back and saying, oh, he was autistic, he didn't mean it. One of my clients said this and said, I'm still the girl it happened to.
Yeah.
So I'm still the girl it happened to. And that was still a devastating thing. But looking through it with the new lens helped depersonalize it
Mm-hmm.
some. So that was number one, depersonalize. It also created the space for us to talk about like what would be helpful when we had this hospital incident a couple of years ago. Like, if you need a break, just tell me. Can you just tell me you're going to take a break? Or you're going to be gone 10 or 15 minutes. If you need a thing to do, like run to mom's house or go get lunch, so you get to help and have a task, but also you get to be out. Can we just communicate about those things? So the new skill was, depersonalizing for me. Where can I accommodate? And kind of having those conversations before you get in the middle of it was a skill
Mm-hmm.
too. So what would help? What's a task? If you are overwhelmed, how can you signal me? Because it's important to me that you're not overwhelmed. Because if he gets overwhelmed and dysregulated, then he's no help to me. Now I feel like
Right.
I'm managing him in the situation, and I don't want to do that. So as we've talked about those things, and sometimes we'll start, I don't know, a couple of years ago, he's like, I want to have a discussion about my old workplace. And I'm like, oh, dear Lord, we have not gotten through that ever without being, but we went on a walk. So that helped, being side by side and walking and using both parts of our brain. It's like, okay, our kind of boundary was for this loop, it's like maybe a half a mile or 3/4 of a mile. We'll try to figure it out. But if we get triggered, we're just gonna have to put this in the unsolved mystery file. That we actually did come to a different understanding because of different skill sets. And then he asked some questions that were curious versus felt like an interrogation. And we could kind of solve that. And now we can still agree to disagree on what we thought happened during that time, but we understand each other's perspective. Because sometimes you're not going to come to the agreement and still get the same perspective on things. It's just understanding there was a different perspective and that impacted two people differently. And sometimes the neurotypical will be like, well, until you understand it and felt it the exact way I did, you didn't really get it. And that's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then sometimes the demand for the apology, the demand for the, that is something that's added to that. You not only do you have to understand it and recognize it, but I need you to apologize. And then that oftentimes, for what I see, it just derails everything at that point. Dan, what would you like to add to what Stephanie just said?
I think that perspective idea is extremely important. Many times we get to the place where we think there is only one truth and we think we have it. Whatever that definition of true is, we think, well, mine is it. And the reality is neither one of you probably actually have a whole handle on the truth. And just being able to accept that whatever that person's perspective was is true to them, whatever my perspective is true to me, and if it's necessary, and I'm not always convinced it is, to find the absolute truth, it is a set of things that neither of us know, plus the mixture of what both of us know. And it's many times easy to get caught up in, well, we need to be able to define the absolute true here. And I don't think that's always true. Sometimes it might be. But in the case of a perspective like what she just said on this is my perspective of that old job and this is her perspective, actually coming to the right answer, where right is what is the perspective of that job, isn't all that important. What is important is our ability to accept the fact that both of us had a different perspective and be able to move on with it. And, just as much as that happened, whenever it was that happened, some other revelation, some other moment in our now and future might add another piece of information to it, and we can revisit and surface another unveiling. But the value, I think, isn't the truth, it's the process. It is that let's pull away the next layer of onion, because now we're closer to the core of that particular thing. We get to share more of the core with each other, process that independently. Another nugget shows up, and right there is the relational aspect of problem solving inside of that actually is more important than the solution.
Yeah. So, I often say we look back to understand in order to make progress going forward. If we go back in time to these former conflicts, but we go right back into the conflicts, like I call it the boxing ring, we step right back in and right back into our antagonistic, I'm right, you're wrong. There's no benefit to that. And that just heaps more and more, trauma on the relationship. But like you said, Dan, if we can go back and look at it in order to peel another layer of the onion off, then that's more connecting. That's connecting and insightful. Okay, and we're going to pause there for this portion of my chat with Stephanie and Dan Holmes. Be sure to tune in 2 weeks to hear part 2 of my conversation with them. I promise you won't want to miss it. That's a wrap for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so you won't miss any of these amazing interviews. And as always, if you're benefiting and enjoying this podcast, please give us a review. It really helps other people know that this podcast is really beneficial and worth listening to. Thanks for watching on YouTube or tuning in to your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to visit me online at jodicarlton.com for more resources. I have assessment quizzes, educational articles, courses, and more. And if you have any questions, just reach out to my team at gethelp@jodicarlton.com. Until next time.